This is the thing that is ruining your AI agent. I see it everywhere now. People are turning it on without even thinking, and it's called MCP. Now, on the surface, it looks pretty good, right? You have the ability to plug in any server with a bunch of tools and give it access and instantly superpower your agent. But here's the catch. The way it works is quietly making your agent slower, more expensive, and in some cases, actually dumber. I'm going to break down what MCP really is, show you exactly why it's hurting your agent, walk you through a couple of examples, and then I'll share exactly what you need to do to get all the benefits with none of the downsides. What exactly is MCP, Model Context Protocol? Pretty much, it's an open source and neutral way for applications, specifically AI applications, to connect to external systems. So when you use MCP, any AI app like Claude, ChatGPT, Cursor, any of these tools has the ability to connect to data sources, tools, engines, workflows, basically anything through a single unified interface. So the way I like to think about it is it's sort of like a USB Type-C for AI, right? So on the left here, you have the AI applications, Claude, ChatGPT, Cursor. And on the right, you have sort of the resource or the system that we're giving AI access to. Now, at the high level, you have things like Google Drive. Maybe you have something like Sentry, Slack, etc. And underneath this protocol, you set a set of tools. And we'll cover exactly what that is right in a minute. And you can create an MCP server for pretty much anything. If you wanted to, you today could say, I'm going to use a Google search tool, a Gmail tool, a Sentry tool. You can make it up with whatever you want. I'm going to create a protocol. I'm going to create an interface for the AI to see that. And so that the AI always knows, here's what are the tools that are available, and here's how I can use it. Now, would it make sense? Probably not. And a good example of this is, let's look at PostHog. So PostHog has an MCP. And for those of you who don't know, PostHog is an analytics platform. It's used for, tracking product metrics, product analytics. And here you can see that they have a lot of tools. I don't know how many exactly. When I checked last time, it was about 42 tools. So PostHog MCP is the overarching thing that the AI model sees. It says PostHog, and then it says it has access to all of the tools. So the AI actually can say, well, if I want to search the document, I want to track the list the errors, do something along the lines of, how many users and metrics, it can do that through the PostHog MCP. Now, in order for us to fully understand how MCP works, we first need to know what is an agent. Now, everyone has a bunch of different definitions for what an agent is. You have frameworks, you have literally multi-billion-dollar companies coming up with different definitions and their own definition of agents. But in the simplest form factor, I like to think of an agent as LLM model, a set of tools, and the ability to loop. So for example, I am the user, I come in with some kind of question, it goes to any AI model, GPT-5, Claude, it has access to a set of tools. And based on what the user's question is, it can continue to use those tools in a loop, or it can answer. So for example, if I say hypothetically, get me the weather for Vancouver, and if it's more than 15 degrees, get the weather for San Francisco. Now, in this case, the agent, very simple agent, would say, okay, so first it would get the weather for Vancouver, see what the temperature is, and then if it is greater than 15 degrees, it would grab the weather for San Francisco. So in the simplest form factor, it'll loop until it can sufficiently answer. Now, different models can reason for longer and can use more steps. So for example, GPT-5 with high reasoning can probably go on for an hour and can do more complex tasks for you. So that's kind of how I like to think of what an agent is. MCP, what this does within the context of an agent is it doesn't give it a single tool. Instead, what it does is it gives it a tool set or like a toolbox, right? Think of it as you have a bucket of a bunch of tools and you're saying this bucket is responsible for one thing. So in the example of PostHog, you saw they have 40 different tools. And we say to the model, this is PostHog. It has a bucket of these 40 tools, and here's how you can use it through the MCP protocol. Now you can give any subset of MCP servers to a model, and there's no real limitation on the number of tools. And this is where we start to see the problem with agents and MCP servers. So let's actually take a look at what exactly is behind an MCP server. So again, pulling up PostHog as my example, we have this definition. We describe, what are the various capabilities, and you could go down, and it's actually a pretty large file. And this is all being sent to the model, okay? And this is, all of the capabilities, all of the explanations that the AI model sees through the MCP server. And here you have tool definitions. This one's a little bit less. And so there, now we see how the tools are very large. And now the main problem here is there's a lot of information for the AI model to know and understand. And I'm not going to dive into the concept of tokens and how all of that works. Each model sees all of these MCP server definitions in its context window. and it takes up a lot of tokens. It takes up a lot of information that the model has to see for the MCP server to work. So as an example, if I go here and I copy this giant thing, I go to the OpenAI tokenizer, and it'll tell me 23,000 tokens. Okay. A token, and you can kind of read to the explanation. So, 100 tokens is equal to 75 words. About like 1 page of text is, probably like 600 tokens, roughly, give or take. So, you have 23,000 tokens going to the model at every single turn. And this is, again, the problem with MCP. As you provide more and more tools to the model, their capabilities goes down. Now, maybe in a year from now that changes. But unfortunately, the more tools you give to the model, the harder, or not the harder, the worse it gets at picking what to use. It gets confused. It says, here, I have the PostHog MCP server. It has these 40 tools. I have the Gmail MCP server. It has these tools. It can go on and on. And again, these models aren't good enough just yet to be able to understand and distinguish all of this information and process it well and give you a pretty good answer. So this isn't the main issue, right? This is when you're trying to use an MCP server. A lot of places let you toggle MCP servers on and off. So here, for example, I have this keywords everywhere tool, this MCP server. It lets me sort of get keyword information. Now you can see there is a lot of tools here. I can enable all the tools, I can disable it. And in the context of, you trying to use an MCP server and you're trying to make it like, make the agent better, you could go in and toggle some of them on, some of them off. Like, for example, for me, I don't need some of these, I don't need get credits, get countries, get currencies, things like that, right? I can go in and manually do it. But the problem is a lot of products, whether it's Cursor or ChatGPT, when you add an MCP server, it keeps it on by default and it bloats the context. In this scenario, right, I am going and manually turning these on and off. But a lot of the time, what I see is that the MCP servers are on by default. So here I have Cursor open, and now my postdog MCP isn't working. But this, if I were to have this on but not use it, every single chat request to Cursor would go to Claude or go to OpenAI, including those 23,000 tokens. This here is the problem. Companies are enabling MCP, users are adding it, but users are not remembering to turn it off when they're not using MCP, and it starts to get very, very expensive. You can do the math, and I'll probably throw the math up on screen, to send one request to the various AI models with the PostHog MCP. And sure, there's things like context caching. The real issue here is that the models just cannot reason well with all of this junk context. For example, I'm coding. I need to ask it about front end, back end. It also has the PostHog MCP server. Maybe it has a linear, like it has access to all of these tools. Guess what happens? First of all, it's going to be slower. There's more tokens. So in general, the compute to run the request is going to take longer. Two, it's going to have a difficult time determining what tools to use in the context of coding. So maybe my coding agent has a couple of different tools that say read, write. And again, like we mentioned, more tools generally means worse performance for models. And then three, the worst of them all is that your cost is just going to go up. You're sending so many tokens every single request, and it's junk, and the model gets confused. And I see this happen, and unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize this, is that they'll create their agent, they'll have their MCP server, they're like, all right, great, I got my postdoc, I got my Ahrefs, there's a lot of servers, I got my linear, great, I got like 4 or 5 MCP servers. And then every single request, every single chat they're saying, even if it's, hey, how are you? Hey, help me with this math problem. Hey, help me with this coding problem. All of those MCP servers by default are always on. Now, again, the easiest way to get around this is to just by default turn off all your MCP servers, regardless of where you have it, until you need to use it. But I think the more important thing is that when you are building an agent, you're trying to understand how MCP works, when to use MCP, is that you more importantly understand what the concept, what tools are, how they relate to MCP servers, and how when you create or give access a model to MCP, it sees all of the tokens. It has all of this context. You get context bloat, and you get worse performance. Now, I know models in a year from now might not run into that, but in today, where still it's not super cheap to run these really smart reasoning models, sending 20, 30, in this example, we use PostHog. Most people have 2, 3, 4 MCP servers on. 100,000 tokens going to the model, costing you $1 per request. It's expensive, slow, and you're getting worse agent / model performance. So hopefully this video was helpful. I just wanted to cover this because I've seen a lot of people talking about it. It's gaining a lot of traction. It's something that I myself, I'm like, sometimes I'll be using Claude or I'll be using, Cursor, and I'm starting to wonder, like, why is my agent, why does it suck? Like, it's making very uncharacteristic mistakes. Little did I know, I forgot to turn off the MCP server I was using the other day for a completely different task. So as long as you know these things, you should be good. Hopefully this was helpful. I'll see you in the next one.